Welcome. It is time for Constitution Study Television. I am Douglas V. Gibbs, your host. You can find out more about me at douglasvgibbs.com, and I blog at politicalpistachio.com. And today is Mother's Day 2018, or at least the day that I'm recording this. And I thought, after doing my introduction video, why not do one on Mother's Day about who I consider to be the founding mother of this country. Now, yes, I know that the father of this country is known as George Washington, so it would seem reasonable that Martha Washington, his wife, would be the mother of the country. And she was important. I mean, during the Revolutionary War, she darned socks for the troops. She was a confidant and consultant of her husband. They talked often, and she was very opinionated. But even more important confidant, in my opinion, or at least a more influential confidant in many ways, was Elizabeth Powel. When I go to speak at engagements with different groups and clubs, especially if it's a women's group, I tell the groups that my favorite founding father is a woman, Elizabeth Powel. Elizabeth Powel had children, but they all died young. So she didn't really have children per se. She wasn't a Mother's Day wise, because her children had died young, but yet she was of this country. Now, Elizabeth Powel was married to Samuel Powell, and Samuel Powell was the mayor of Philadelphia. And together they owned a business that today I guess we would call a bed and breakfast. And they served these opulent dinners at the Powell House to attract the most notable travelers. In fact, in 1774, John Adams, writing to his wife Abigail, explained, "A most sinful feast again, everything which could delight the eye or allure the taste." Or at least that was his opinion of the dinners at the Powell House. And, after they were finished with the dinner, these travelers, the John Adams of the world, the George Washingtons, and so on and so forth, they would retreat to the parlor to discuss politics, light their pipes and discuss politics. It is said that George Washington ate 2/3 of his dinners or suppers at the Powell House during the Constitutional Convention during the summer of 1787. Now, Elizabeth Powell is also known for another famous story. After the end of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, Benjamin Franklin stepped out of the Independence Hall, crossed over a grassy hill, and Elizabeth Powell approached him. It'll say in the story, a woman in a bonnet, and she asked him, "Sir, what have you given us, a republic or a monarchy?" And he said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." Now, I find it fascinating that he personalized it. "A republic, madam, if you can keep it," or at least that's what the Mount Vernon website says. And at the time, a woman could not vote. Her influence was, not necessarily seen as being very important, but yet, in the case of Elizabeth Powell, it was. She was able to keep the republic not because of voting, but because of her influence, of getting to know these people, being actively involved with the politicians and the candidates. It was common to see Elizabeth Powell and George Washington strolling the streets, discussing the issues of the day. And if you go to Mount Vernon and the Powell House for that matter, and you get a chance to see the letters, their letter writing was extensive also, in addition to their times together to talk. And the letters from Elizabeth Powell, interestingly enough, well, back then when you would write a letter and you would seal your envelope, the back of the envelope where you would seal it would be with a wax stamp, and the wax stamp would have a image on it or a caricature of words, whatever, that identified who sent it. And if you look carefully at those wax stamps, all of the letters from George Washington to Elizabeth Powell were stamped by Martha Washington. So if anybody out there is thinking there might have been some improprietary activities between the two, not the case. Elizabeth Powell and George Washington were very good friends. And Martha Washington knew of their relationship and read the letters and, gave her seal of approval with her wax stamp. In one of the letters, George Washington sent out 3 letters at one point, indicating to George Washington sent letters indicating to James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and Elizabeth Powell, those are the three recipients of this letter, that he really didn't want to serve a second term. He was tired. He didn't feel good. And it was Elizabeth Powell that responded and said, George, you are the foundation of this new Constitution. If you don't serve a second term, it will be seen as an abandonment. The anti-federalists and the enemies of the Constitution will use it as a way to dismantle this new system. It needs a firm foundation. It needs you to serve 2 terms. Now, when George Washington first became president, there was a discussion over what he should be called. Your Highness, Your Majesty, his personal favorite, His Highly Mightiness. And it was Elizabeth Powell that said, George, you know what this position's about. You're not a king. I think Mr. President will be fine. While George Washington is credited with coining the term Mr. President, it was really Elizabeth Powell that came up with the idea. Now, Elizabeth Powell continued to be active in politics long after George Washington died, shortly after the end of his second term. She continued to have the opulent dinners. Her and her husband were very involved in the political scene, and Elizabeth Powell continued to have a silver tongue, be informed, and influence the politicians around her. So when Benjamin Franklin asked her about keeping the republic, I think she's our example, is she not? Because, see, in a pure democracy, you vote, you go home, and you complain for a year. But in a republic, it takes so much more. And Elizabeth Powell revealed that. Her influence wasn't by voting. Her influence was by getting to know these candidates and these politicians and influencing them by being in touch with them and involved constantly. So I ask, are you? Are you keeping the republic like Elizabeth Powell did? Do you go to your city council meetings? Do you write your representatives? Do they know who you are? Elizabeth Powell is our example, and, Mother's Day, I think it was appropriate to talk about her as, one of the mothers of our country, and one of the unsung and unknown founding fathers, founding mothers of this country. Thanks for listening. You can learn more about me once again at douglasvgibbs.com. Be sure to subscribe, because I want to get enough subscribers so we can update the URL and really get these videos out there. But I need you to hit the subscribe button. And I also want you to share this video with as many people as you can. Email the link. Put it on your website, your Facebook, whatever. Help get the word out. What we're going to do after this video is we're going to start working our way through the Constitution. But I'm going to begin with some of the history prior to the Constitution. We're going to talk about things like Shays' Rebellion, Montesquieu, John Locke, and things that were going on in the colonies prior to the war, and what was happening in the country prior to the Constitution. Articles of Confederation comes to mind. We'll talk about all of that in the next video. So be sure to keep coming back to Constitution Study Television. Thank you for spending the time with me. And I appreciate you. Be Elizabeth Powell. Keep the republic. Get out there and be informed. Thank you. We'll see you next time.